There's a subtle breaking point in every soul, a quiet shift that comes after years of pretending, pleasing, and pushing. It doesn't always come in a dramatic collapse or a loud declaration. Sometimes it arrives on an ordinary morning. You're brushing your teeth, staring into the mirror, and you realize you no longer recognize the person looking back at you. Not because you've aged, not because you've changed your hair or lost weight or gained it, but because your eyes no longer shine with the innocence they once held. You feel the heaviness of years carried on your back, silent compromises stacked like bricks around your chest. And in that moment, not of despair, but of stillness, you finally whisper the truth you've been avoiding. I don't know who I am anymore. That admission isn't defeat, it's the door, the entrance to a deeper remembering, because somewhere along the way, you traded your authenticity for survival. You became what others needed you to be. You shape-shifted into the expectations that surrounded you. You wore the mask so long that it started to feel like skin. And now your soul is tired, not tired from effort, but from the cost of abandonment, the quiet, daily act of leaving yourself behind in exchange for belonging. But here's what you're learning. Belonging that costs you yourself is not belonging. It's bondage, and you're ready to be free. At first, freedom feels foreign. You begin to pull back the layers, and what you find underneath is raw, tender, and unfamiliar. The voice inside is quiet, shaky, unsure of whether it's safe to speak, and yet you listen. You begin asking yourself questions you haven't asked in years. What do I actually enjoy? What does my body need? What lights me up? What have I been ignoring? And the answers don't come quickly. Sometimes they don't come at all. But you've stopped needing everything to make sense. You're okay just sitting in the silence, just holding space for the version of you that never got to speak. You notice that things you once tolerated now feel unbearable. Conversations that used to drain you are no longer easy to smile through. Environments you once navigated effortlessly now feel suffocating. It's not because you become weak, it's because you become aware. Your sensitivity, long buried beneath layers of coping, has reemerged like a lighthouse in the fog, guiding you toward what feels true. And that truth, however inconvenient, however uncomfortable, is no longer something you can ignore. Because once you start remembering who you are, everything that isn't aligned begins to fall apart. It's painful. You mourn things that others celebrate. You grieve friendships that no longer resonate. You cry for the years you lost chasing approval, managing impressions, and silencing your truth. And still, you don't go back, because the cost of betraying yourself again is higher than the cost of letting go. You no longer measure your worth by your ability to meet others' expectations. You stop trying to fix yourself to fit into places that were never meant for you. You start asking, what if I'm not too much? What if I was just in environments that couldn't hold my depth? You begin to recognize the difference between peace and performing. You remember what it feels like to be alone without being lonely. You discover how to rest, not the kind of rest that comes from collapsing after burnout, but the kind that comes from choosing stillness before you're exhausted. You sit outside without your phone. You let the breeze touch your face. You notice the way the sunlight dances on the floor. You eat slowly. You speak more gently to yourself. You stop rushing. You stop running. You begin to trust the pace of presence. And it's here, in this slowness, that you finally meet yourself. Not the edited version, not the masked one, but the real you. The one who's been quietly waiting for your return. The one who remembers what you love, what you long for, what you're capable of. The one who isn't afraid to be misunderstood, to take up space, to live differently. You realize that this version of you doesn't need fixing. She needs nurturing. She needs safety. She needs to be heard and seen and honored. And you decide you will be the one to give her that. You no longer seek external permission to follow your joy. You give yourself the green light. You stop asking if it's okay to want more, to dream differently, to choose rest, to say no. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop editing your dreams to make them more realistic. You start living like someone who believes she deserves to feel good, not eventually, not when everything's in order, but now. You decorate your life with the things that matter to you, not what looks impressive. You start feeling at home not because of where you are, but because of how you're choosing to be. And slowly others start to notice. They say you seem calmer, softer, stronger. They don't know the battles you fought within, the old identities you've buried, the conversations you've had with your own shame. But it doesn't matter. You didn't do this to be seen. You did it to be free. And freedom doesn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looks like sipping tea in silence. Sometimes it looks like going to bed at 9. Sometimes it looks like finally saying, "This doesn't work for me anymore." You've stopped waiting for someone to save you. You've become your own sanctuary. You no longer need to be rescued from your feelings. You've learned how to hold them. You no longer need to be validated by those who don't understand you. You've learned how to witness yourself. You stop turning your pain into a performance. You stop proving your strength through silence. You start trusting that your softness is sacred. You start believing that your truth is enough. And from this space of self-trust, everything begins to bloom. Not quickly, not all at once, but deeply. Roots growing strong beneath the surface. You start speaking from a different place, not from fear, but from alignment. You say what you mean. You don't over-explain. You stop chasing clarity from others. You start trusting your own clarity. You stop explaining your boundaries. You start embodying them. You stop begging for reciprocity. You start giving to yourself first. You've learned that healing doesn't mean becoming immune to pain. It means becoming more available to truth. It means being able to sit with discomfort without shutting down, to hold joy without waiting for it to disappear, to feel grief and not become it. You no longer fear the waves. You've learned how to ride them. You've stopped looking for safe harbors in other people. You've built your own shoreline, steady and sure. And there's a softness in you now that wasn't there before. Not weakness, but grace. A deep knowing that you don't have to fight your way through life. That surrender is not giving up. It's giving into what's real. You stop grasping. You stop striving. You let things come. You let things go. You trust what stays. You bless what leaves. You walk with open hands and a quieter mind. And maybe this is the true meaning of coming home. Not arriving at a final destination, not achieving a perfect version of yourself, but choosing again and again to return to what is real, to listen deeply, to live gently, to love fiercely, to rest often, to honor what is, even when it's not what you expected, to show up with presence, with honesty, with compassion. And in this home, this quiet inner sanctuary, you no longer fear being alone. You no longer fear being misunderstood. You no longer fear your own reflection. Because now when you look in the mirror, you don't see someone trying to be good enough. You see someone free. There is something sacred in the slowness that healing invites. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It doesn't offer quick fixes or final answers. It whispers quietly, almost like a lullaby that only you can hear. And when you finally stop long enough to listen, you realize that slowness isn't laziness. It's reverence. It's the courage to be with what's real instead of rushing to change it. It's the strength to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. And maybe for the first time in your life, you start to understand that nothing is wrong with you for feeling deeply, for needing rest, for not moving at the speed the world demands. Maybe your softness was never the problem. Maybe your sensitivity was always your strength. It just took time to see it for what it is, a gift. And as you sit in that slowness, something begins to stir within you. Not the kind of movement that demands results, but the kind of stirring that happens when truth begins to rise from the depths. The kind that asks you to pause before you act, to listen before you respond. You begin to move differently, not out of fear, not out of performance, but out of intention. You notice the way your body feels in certain spaces. You pay attention to how your energy shifts around certain people. You start to understand that your inner guidance has been speaking to you all along. You were just too busy, too distracted, too disconnected to notice. You stop ignoring the knots in your stomach. You stop dismissing the lump in your throat. You stop pretending you're okay when your chest feels like it's caving in. And instead you place a hand on your heart and you say, "I'm listening now. I'm here." and your body, long denied the tenderness it deserved, begins to exhale, begins to soften, begins to trust you again, because it remembers what you forgot, that you were never meant to push through everything, that there is wisdom in stillness, that healing requires rest, silence, and time. You begin to honor the seasons of your soul. You no longer expect yourself to bloom all year round. You recognize that there are times to rise and times to retreat, times to speak and times to listen, times to move forward and times to simply be. And in that honoring, you stop measuring your worth by how productive you are. You stop seeing rest as weakness. You begin to understand that your value isn't found in how much you do, but in how deeply you live, in how present you are, in how fully you show up for the life that's happening in this exact breath. You stop needing to explain your healing to people who don't understand. You stop trying to justify your boundaries to those who never respected them to begin with. You learn to say, "This is what I need," without apology. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. You've spent too long betraying yourself to make others comfortable. Now you choose your own comfort, your own rhythm, your own truth, and maybe not everyone will like it, but that's okay. You're no longer here to be liked. You're here to be real, and the real you. She's softer than she's ever been, but she's also stronger, not in the way the world defines strength, not in the pushing, the forcing, the grinding, but in the rootedness, in the groundedness, in the knowing that she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. She knows who she is, and that knowing is enough. She's learning how to be alone without being lonely, how to feel her feelings without drowning in them, how to walk away from what hurts without turning it into a war. She's learning that healing isn't about becoming invincible, it's about becoming more human. And so she begins to build a life around that truth, a life that feels slow and soft and intentional, a life that prioritizes presence over perfection, a life that leaves space for mystery, for magic, for moments that don't need to be explained. She surrounds herself with beauty, not the kind that's curated, but the kind that's felt. Sunlight through the window, the sound of rain, the warmth of a mug in her hands, the weight of a blanket, the smell of something baking. She begins to trust the little things again, begins to find joy in the ordinary, because she knows now that the ordinary is where life really lives. She stops comparing her path to anyone else's, stops measuring her progress by someone else's pace. She understands that some people heal in silence, some in movement, some in community, some in solitude, and it's all valid, it's all sacred. She honors the uniqueness of her own unfolding. She knows that her timing is divine, even if it doesn't look like anyone else's. She's done trying to rush the process. She's learned that growth is not linear, that healing doesn't happen on a schedule, that some days you move forward and some days you sit in the stillness, and both are holy. She learns how to be with herself in the discomfort. She no longer runs from it. She sits in the grief, in the fear, in the longing, in the anger, not to wallow in it, but to understand it, to give it space to breathe. She knows that emotions are not enemies, they're messengers. And when she listens without judgment, she hears the truth beneath the pain, the need beneath the reaction, the wound beneath the trigger. And in hearing that truth, she finds clarity, finds peace, finds herself. And in finding herself, she reclaims her voice. Not the loudest one in the room, but the most honest, the one that speaks not to be heard, but to be true. She stops filtering her truth to make it easier for others to swallow, stops translating her feelings into something more palatable. She says what she means. She honors what she needs. She speaks from her soul, and the more she does, the more her life begins to reflect her truth. She no longer fits into places she used to bend herself to belong in. She no longer relates to people who only knew the version of her that was always performing. And that's okay, because what she's gaining is more valuable than what she's losing. She's gaining herself, her full self. Not just the polished parts, but the messy parts, the raw parts, the parts that cry at nothing and everything, the parts that need more time, more space, more love. She embraces it all, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And real is what she's been craving all along. Not surface, not shallow, not performance, but presence, depth, intimacy. She wants conversations that make her feel seen, relationships that allow her to grow, spaces that let her rest. And more than anything, she wants to give those things to herself. So she creates them. She creates rituals that root her. Mornings with music, evenings with candles, walks without her phone. She creates boundaries that protect her, time for herself, energy for what matters, distance from what doesn't. She creates practices that nourish her, breathing, writing, moving, crying, laughing. She creates a life that supports her healing, not one she has to heal from. And in doing so, she begins to feel safe. Not because the world has changed, but because she has. She's no longer searching for safety outside of herself, no longer outsourcing her sense of security to people or places or circumstances. She's building it from within, brick by brick, breath by breath, with gentleness, with patience, with love. And this inner safety, it changes everything. It makes her less reactive, more responsive, less anxious, more trusting, less needy, more whole. It becomes the foundation upon which she builds everything else. And because of that, her life begins to reflect her inner world. Calmer, clearer, more grounded, more true. This is not a transformation the world always sees, but she feels it. In her breath, in her body, in her bones. She knows something sacred is happening within her, and she honors it, protects it, celebrates it. She no longer waits for someone else to validate her growth. She no longer needs applause to believe she's evolving. She sees it in the way she pauses before reacting, in the way she holds herself through discomfort, in the way she speaks up when she used to shrink. These are her milestones. These are her miracles. And maybe this is what healing really is. Not becoming perfect, but becoming real. Not fixing everything, but feeling everything. Not rushing forward, but returning to the self you left behind, to the truth you forgot, to the love you deserve. And maybe healing isn't about changing who you are. Maybe it's about becoming who you were before the world told you to be something else. And in this remembering, she's coming alive again. Not in the way that's flashy or loud, but in the way that's rooted and deep and lasting. She's not chasing light, she's becoming it. Not reaching for peace, she's embodying it. Not searching for home, she's building it inside of herself. There is a subtle beauty in reclaiming parts of yourself you forgot were even missing. It happens slowly, like a fog lifting. One moment at a time, one breath at a time. There is no grand ceremony when you remember who you are. It's quieter than that. It's in the way your shoulders begin to relax when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself. It's in the way your eyes soften when you look in the mirror and don't wince. It's in the way your voice sounds more like truth than survival. This is not a reinvention. It's not the creation of a new version of you. It's the soft homecoming of someone who's always been there, buried beneath the layers you wore just to be safe, just to be accepted, just to survive. You start to walk through life with a different kind of presence. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that holds attention simply by being grounded. You begin to realize that confidence doesn't come from how loudly you speak, but from how deeply you know yourself. You don't have to argue anymore. You don't need to be the smartest in the room. You don't feel the urge to prove your value in every interaction. You just are. And your beingness, your existence, is more than enough. That's a truth you couldn't accept before, because the world kept screaming that you had to earn your place here, that you had to be impressive, productive, likable. But now you know those were illusions, projections, systems designed to keep you questioning yourself. You no longer subscribe to them. You have unsubscribed from the noise. You have tuned into something more ancient, more sacred, your own knowing. And with that knowing comes clarity, not necessarily about where your life is going, but about where it has come from. You start to see that the pain wasn't wasted, that the heartbreaks weren't meaningless, that the losses, though brutal, carved space for a deeper kind of love. You stop regretting the past, not because it was easy, but because it shaped you, because it forced you to confront truths that would have otherwise remained hidden. You begin to forgive, not just others, but yourself, for the choices you made when you didn't know better, for the times you stayed too long, for the years you spent pretending. You stop judging yourself through the lens of who you are now. You begin to see your past self as someone who was doing the best she could with what she knew, and you love her for it. Forgiveness becomes a language you speak fluently now. It's not passive. It's not about letting people off the hook. It's about setting yourself free, about cutting the cords that keep you tethered to stories that no longer serve you. You stop defining yourself by what happened to you. You start defining yourself by how you've chosen to respond. And that response is rooted not in bitterness, but in liberation. You're not here to repeat the story. You're here to rewrite it, and so you do. With every decision you make that aligns with your truth, with every moment you choose rest over proving, with every time you honor your feelings instead of dismissing them, you begin to shape a new reality, one that reflects who you are becoming instead of who you used to be. And it's not always easy. The world around you may still try to pull you back, to tempt you with the comfort of old patterns, familiar roles, the illusion of safety. But you've outgrown them, not because you're better, but because you're different now. You've tasted truth, and you can't go back to pretending it isn't real. You begin to redefine love, not as dependency, but as interdependence. Not as possession, but as presence. You stop looking for someone to complete you. You're not a puzzle piece. You're not broken. You are whole. And from that wholeness, you begin to build relationships that reflect your values, your boundaries, your depth. You are no longer attracted to chaos. You no longer find drama romantic. You crave stability, kindness, authenticity. You crave someone who doesn't just tolerate your truth, but cherishes it. Someone who listens not just to your words, but to your silences. And even more than that, you crave to be that person for yourself. You become your own safe place, your own soft landing, your own most consistent source of love. You stop abandoning yourself in moments of pain. You stay, you breathe, you feel, you rise, again and again. And it's in that staying that you begin to trust yourself, to believe that no matter what life throws at you, you will not leave yourself behind. You've done it before, and it nearly destroyed you. Never again. Now you are committed to your own presence. That is the root of your resilience, and the world responds. Not always how you expect, but in ways that affirm your shift. Opportunities arise that feel aligned. People enter your life who mirror your growth. Doors close that once held you hostage. You stop chasing what's not yours. You stop clinging to what wants to go. You understand now that what is meant for you will never require self-betrayal. That ease is not laziness, it's alignment. That joy is not frivolous, it's fuel. That rest is not weakness, it's wisdom. You begin to live with more intention. You declutter your schedule, your space, your mind. You stop overcommitting. Stop saying yes when you mean no. You value your time, your energy, your peace. You curate your life like art, not to impress, but to express. You let go of the pressure to be extraordinary. You find beauty in being ordinary, in loving what you love, doing what you do, being who you are. You realize that you don't have to be a brand or a performance. You just have to be you. And being you? That's the most radical thing you can do in a world that profits from your self-doubt. That's the rebellion, the revolution, the quiet, powerful act of choosing your truth day after day, breath after breath. You stop waiting to be ready. You stop waiting to be perfect. You show up now, as you are, with your messy heart, your open hands, your trembling voice. You show up because the world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more presence. More people willing to live with their hearts wide open, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. You no longer fear pain the way you used to. You know now that pain has something to teach, that discomfort is often the doorway, that grief is love in another form. You don't rush to escape it. You don't label it as bad. You sit with it, listen to it, let it pass through. You are no longer afraid to feel, because you trust yourself to feel it all and still remain whole. You are no longer afraid to lose, because you know that what's real can never be taken. You are no longer afraid to rest, because you know that your value does not come from how much you do, but from who you are when you're simply being. And maybe that's the most profound healing of all. Learning to be fully, freely, without apology, without performance, without the need to fix or change or become, just being, just breathing, just living in your truth. And in that being, you become. There's a shift that takes place so quietly you almost miss it. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. One day you just notice that you're no longer clinging to what you once thought you couldn't live without. You wake up and realize that the ache that used to wrap around your ribs has softened, that the thoughts that once consumed your every moment have quieted, that your world, once built around survival and seeking approval, now revolves around something more sacred: peace. Not the peace that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind of peace that whispers, "Even this I can hold." You begin to see that healing isn't something that always feels good. It's not always soft, not always graceful. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it looks like saying no to what you've said yes to 1,000 times. Sometimes it feels like grief, like letting go of dreams that were never really yours. Sometimes it feels like silence so loud it forces you to hear everything you've spent your life running from. And in those moments, you want to run again. You want to go back to what was familiar, even if it hurt. But you don't. You stay. You breathe. You let it move through you. Because now you know. You know that running doesn't bring peace. Numbing doesn't bring clarity. Pretending doesn't bring freedom. You've learned how to stay, how to sit with discomfort without becoming it, how to listen to your own soul speak in the language of emotion, of intuition, of longing. And though it's still hard sometimes, though you still have days where you forget, where you falter, where the weight of the past tries to pull you under, you remember more quickly now. You return more gently. You no longer punish yourself for needing time. You no longer see healing as a race. You know now that every step you take toward yourself is holy, and so you begin to live more fully, not in the loud, dramatic way the world often celebrates, but in the quiet, intentional way that feels rooted and real. You slow down. You say no more often. You choose quality over quantity, in conversations, in connections, in commitments. You stop spending time where you feel drained. You stop sharing yourself with those who don't value your depth. You stop explaining your softness to those who only understand strength as sharpness. You realize that not everyone will understand you, and you stop needing them to, because you understand you. You know what it's taken to get here. You know the courage it's taken to keep showing up, to keep breathing through the pain, to keep choosing softness when it would have been easier to harden. And that understanding, that deep, unshakable self-knowledge, becomes your anchor, your center, your compass. It guides you through uncertainty. It reminds you who you are when everything else feels unsure. It becomes the truth you return to again and again. You find yourself speaking more gently, not just to others, but to yourself. You no longer criticize your emotions. You no longer shame yourself for needing space. You stop calling your sensitivity a weakness. You start celebrating it as the gift it is. The world has hardened so many hearts, but yours stayed open. And that, you realize, is its own kind of miracle. You begin to find strength in your vulnerability, not in pretending you're fine, but in telling the truth when you're not, in reaching out when you need help, in showing up in your fullness, even when it feels risky. You no longer perform strength, you embody it. Not through control or perfection, but through presence, through being real, through staying tender in a world that wants you to be tough. You stop chasing love, chasing success, chasing clarity. You begin to trust the timing of your life. You begin to believe that what is meant for you will not pass you by, that you don't have to force or beg or prove. You start letting go of the things that don't feel right, even if they once did. You trust your body when it says no. You trust your intuition when it whispers that something is off. You stop gaslighting yourself. You start listening. And in listening, you hear things you've missed. You hear the sound of your own laughter and realize how long it's been. You hear the quiet yes inside your heart when something aligns. You hear the stillness that lives beneath the chaos. And you realize that this deep listening is what you were missing all along. Not more advice, not more answers, but more presence, more connection, more trust in your own knowing. You begin to create a life that feels like yours. Not a life that looks good on paper, not a life that checks every box, but a life that fits your soul. You stop molding yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for you. You start building your own spaces. You create rituals that nourish you. You surround yourself with people who see you. You make choices that honor your energy, and slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to bloom. Not because everything is perfect, not because the pain has vanished, but because you've given yourself the permission to grow in your own way, in your own time, on your own terms. You understand that growth isn't always visible, that some of the most important shifts happen beneath the surface, in the quiet, in the waiting, in the stillness that the world doesn't celebrate, but your soul desperately needs. You begin to see yourself not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be loved. You stop trying to fix yourself. You stop treating healing like a to-do list. You start treating yourself with the kind of tenderness you've always craved from others. And in doing so, you fill the spaces within that once felt empty. You no longer look outside for the love you found inside. And that changes everything. Because now, you're not walking through life searching. You're not operating from lack. You're not chasing the illusion of enoughness. You're rooted, you're grounded, you're present. You know who you are, even if you're still becoming. You trust your path, even if it doesn't look like anyone else's. You honor your process, even if it's slower than you expected. You are no longer performing your life. You are living it, moment by moment, breath by breath. And in this living, you are free. There's a tenderness that begins to rise when you stop carrying the weight of who you thought you had to be. It doesn't happen in a moment, but in countless micro decisions to let go. Let go of the need to impress, the pressure to perform, the desperate hope that if you just did more, said the right thing, or smiled wide enough, maybe then you'd be enough. You begin to understand that enoughness isn't something to be earned. It's your starting place. It's the soil you were born from. And when you really feel that, when it stops being a concept and starts being a truth in your bones, the striving begins to dissolve. You breathe differently. You move differently. You begin to live from your center instead of chasing something outside yourself. You start observing how many times you said yes out of fear, how many times you gave your time, your energy, your heart to people who offered you just enough to keep you hoping. You see the patterns, not with shame, but with clarity. You see that you were always just trying to be loved in the ways you didn't receive as a child, trying to be chosen, validated, seen. And it hurts, this realization. It breaks your heart a little to see how much you tolerated, how long you stayed in places that made you shrink, just for the illusion of belonging. But then the deeper truth comes. You don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to trade your truth for temporary connection. You don't have to contort yourself into someone else's idea of love. You don't have to be chosen by someone else to choose yourself. And when you finally choose yourself, not as a fallback, not as a second option, but as a sacred act, everything changes. You start coming home to your own body. You begin listening to it like you would a dear friend. You stop forcing it to move, to shrink, to look a certain way. You treat it with kindness. You let it rest when it's tired. You feed it what makes it feel nourished, not punished. You start to notice the quiet signals it gives, the way your chest tightens around certain people, the way your energy lifts around others. You begin to trust those signals. You no longer gaslight yourself into staying in situations where your nervous system is screaming, "This isn't right." And when you start honoring your body's wisdom, your entire life starts to align. You find yourself saying no with more ease, not because you're cold or selfish, but because you're no longer willing to abandon yourself. You understand that your energy is a currency, and not everyone has earned access to it. You protect your peace like it's holy, because it is. You stop inviting chaos just to feel alive. You stop mistaking drama for depth. You begin to crave quiet, stability, truth. You want relationships where you don't have to explain why you need time alone, where your depth is welcomed, not feared, where your softness is met with reverence, not ridicule, and you start to speak differently. You don't sugarcoat your needs anymore. You don't over-apologize for taking up space. You say what you mean, not with aggression, but with grounded clarity. You stop managing other people's emotions at the expense of your own. You let them react how they need to, while you stay rooted in your truth. You're not here to be agreeable. You're here to be authentic. And that authenticity, it radiates. Not in a flashy way, but in the way your presence feels honest, settled, unapologetically you. This shift, it's not always comfortable. In fact, it often feels like loss. You lose people. You lose the roles you once played. You lose the illusion of control. And grief comes in waves, not just for what's gone, but for the parts of yourself that had to dim in order to survive. But beneath the grief, there's something else growing: freedom. Freedom that isn't dependent on anything outside of you. Freedom that doesn't ask you to be perfect. Freedom that exists in the permission to be messy, to change, to start over as many times as you need. And in this freedom, you begin to find joy again. Not performative joy, not the kind that needs to be photographed or shared or validated. Quiet joy, soul joy. The kind that finds you in the middle of doing nothing. The kind that lives in your morning cup of tea, in the way the sun hits the floor. In the laughter that escapes you when no one's around. You start making decisions based on joy, not fear. You ask, does this feel expansive? Does this make me feel more like myself? And if the answer is no, you walk away, without guilt, without explanation. You understand now that healing isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about being present with whatever is. It's about facing the hard stuff without running. It's about choosing love when fear is louder. It's about trusting that you are strong enough to hold whatever arises. You no longer chase after the illusion of arriving. You realize that there is no destination where everything makes sense and nothing hurts. There's only the journey, the breath, the moment, the presence. And that's more than enough. You find peace not in having all the answers, but in learning to live with the questions. You begin to trust life again. Not because it's always kind, but because you've learned how to be kind to yourself within it. You stop waiting for external circumstances to change so you can feel better. You start choosing peace, even when there's noise. You start choosing love, even when your heart is guarded. You start choosing presence, even when it would be easier to numb. You are not trying to escape yourself anymore. You are learning how to stay, and in staying, you're building something beautiful. Not perfect, but real, and real is more than enough. There is a particular silence that comes after you've released something that once defined you. It's not an empty silence. It's not hollow or lonely. It's the kind of silence that feels like the space between your exhale and your next breath. A quiet pause where possibility begins to whisper. You feel it in your bones, that subtle realization that you've let go of something heavy, and now there's room for something true. At first it feels unfamiliar. You look around your life and see where the roles have been stripped away, where the performances have been dropped, where the masks no longer fit. And there's a temptation to fill the space quickly, to grab onto the next identity, the next goal, the next distraction. But you don't, not this time, because now you're starting to understand the power of sacred pause. In this pause, you listen, not to the world, not to the noise, but to yourself. You listen to what your soul has been trying to say beneath the deadlines and obligations. You listen to what your body has been whispering through aches and fatigue. You listen to the voice you used to ignore, the one that said, I want something different. You start noticing the places in your life that feel forced, the conversations that leave you depleted, the patterns that keep looping, even when you swear you've outgrown them. And instead of judging yourself for still being in process, you meet yourself with compassion. You say, of course it's taking time. Of course I'm still learning. Of course it's messy. And in that softness, something inside of you exhales. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. You're no longer constantly looking outside of yourself for direction. You're learning how to trust your own rhythm, your own intuition, your own timing. You don't need to move just because someone else is moving. You don't need to speak just because there's silence. You don't need to rush just because the world worships speed. You've discovered the beauty of stillness, the wisdom in waiting, the clarity that comes when you stop trying to force things into place and let life unfold in its own sacred way. And as you slow down, the truth rises. You see how long you've been trying to earn what was always yours. You see how often you've confused self-sacrifice with love. How often you said yes when your entire being was screaming no. How long you've been holding on to versions of yourself that were only built for survival. And it's not with regret that you see this. It's with reverence. Because those versions carried you here. They kept you safe. They helped you navigate a world that didn't know how to hold your tenderness. But now you're choosing differently. Now you're choosing to live, not just survive. You begin to nurture yourself in ways you once believed were selfish. You start creating space for joy, not just productivity. You start prioritizing rest, not as a reward, but as a right. You take yourself on walks just to hear the sound of your own thoughts. You put your hand on your heart and say, "I'm proud of you," even when no one else does. You eat slowly, you breathe deeply. You let yourself cry without rushing to stop the tears. You laugh without filtering your joy. You begin to feel at home in your own skin, even when it doesn't look the way you once thought it should. And the more you return to yourself, the more you begin to understand that wholeness isn't about never breaking. It's about being able to gather your pieces with grace. It's about knowing that even when you're scattered, even when you're uncertain, even when the past creeps back in and you momentarily lose your way, you are still whole. Because your wholeness was never about perfection. It was about presence. It was about showing up for yourself again and again, even when it's hard. Stop performing for connection. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop trying to be palatable. You stop diluting your truth to fit someone else's comfort. You understand now that authenticity isn't always comfortable, but it's always liberating. And liberation, that's the feeling that begins to move through you like a quiet wave. It's in the way you say no with clarity, not guilt. It's in the way you walk away from what drains you, not because you're bitter, but because you're honoring your energy. It's in the way you sit alone in a room and feel full, not empty. That's what freedom feels like. Not loud, not showy, just real. You begin to love differently, not from desperation, but from fullness. Not from fear, but from choice. You stop chasing those who don't have the capacity to meet you. You stop trying to fix people with your love. You stop begging to be seen. Instead, you become the witness you always needed. You see yourself. You hold yourself. You give yourself what you once begged others to give you. And in that giving, you realize you're not too much. You were never too sensitive. You were never too intense. You just needed deeper waters. And now you seek them. In relationships, in work, in life. You're no longer interested in the surface. You want truth. You want depth. You want intimacy that doesn't require you to hide. You want spaces where silence is safe and vulnerability is sacred. You want friendships that feel like home, not performance. You want conversations that nourish, not deplete. You want a life that reflects who you really are, not who you've pretended to be. And slowly, that life begins to form. Not because you've chased it, but because you've allowed it. Because you've cleared the space for it. Because you've stopped clinging to what was never truly yours. You've learned how to be okay in the in-between, how to trust the pause, how to sit in the dark and still believe in the light. You know now that becoming is not about adding more. It's about remembering. Remembering the self you buried beneath the expectations. Remembering the dreams you silenced because they felt too big. Remembering the love you withheld from yourself because no one ever taught you how to give it. But you're learning now. You're learning how to hold your own heart, how to return to your own breath, how to listen to your body when it whispers, how to rest when your soul feels weary. You're learning how to walk yourself home. And that home, it's not a place, it's not a person, it's a feeling, a truth, a presence that says, you belong here just as you are. And as you live from that place, as you make decisions from that rootedness, life starts to respond, not always in the way you expect, but always in the way you need. You begin to attract what aligns. You begin to release what doesn't. You find yourself surrounded by people who speak the same soul language, who don't ask you to shrink, who don't flinch at your depth, who meet you not in performance, but in presence. And you realize this is it. This is the life you've been trying to create. Not perfect, but honest. Not without pain, but filled with peace. Not free of struggle, but rich in meaning. You're not arriving. You're returning to yourself again and again and again. There comes a time when the echoes of who you once were start to fade. Not because you've erased them, but because you've outgrown them. Not out of bitterness or regret, but out of reverence for the journey you've taken and the soul you've reclaimed. There is no ceremony for this kind of evolution. No bright lights or applause. It's quiet, subtle, like slipping into a version of yourself that fits more comfortably, more honestly, more soulfully than any before. You don't even notice it at first. Just a deeper breath, a softer response, a steadier step. And then you realize you are no longer holding on to things that no longer hold you. You are no longer shrinking in the presence of others just to feel seen. You have become your own witness. And in this witnessing, you begin to understand that life was never asking you to be anyone else but who you already are. It was only ever asking you to remember, to return, to trust that your wholeness was never lost, only buried beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and the need to be loved in ways that felt familiar, even when they hurt. You no longer crave what used to consume you. The things you once obsessed over, being chosen, being right, being perfect, they don't grip you like they once did, because now you know peace is not found in control. It's found in surrender, and you are no longer afraid to surrender. You surrender to your emotions, not because they're comfortable, but because they are messengers. You sit with your anger, not to justify it, but to understand what boundary was crossed. You welcome your sadness, not to drown in it, but to honor the part of you that still grieves. You embrace your joy, not with guilt, but with full presence, knowing that joy is not a reward for suffering, but a birthright. You stop labeling your feelings as good or bad.